So good afternoon. Thank you for joining Aspen Mastermind today, Wednesday, October 6th. Today, we're going to discuss the impacts of climate change on real estate and insurance markets with Albert Slapp and graciously moderated by Gerald Grayson. Mr. Grayson, would you like to introduce yourself and Mr. Slapp?
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. We are all sensitive to climate change. What we may not be sensitive to is the environmental risks to property and how those risks can be understood so they can be managed. My longtime friend, Albert Slapp, who has a long history in Aspen, started a company to identify risks from coastal flooding in places like Florida. That company has expanded to where it now addresses all kinds of environmental risks to property, including wildfire and drought, which should be of interest to an Aspen audience. Due to climate change, environmental events are becoming more frequent and more intense. Properties are being affected that their owners never thought were at risk. Remember the flooding in Houston in 2017 by Hurricane Harvey? Neighborhoods were flooded by heavy rains that were not near the bayous where flooding could have been expected. Homeowners whose homes were swamped never thought they were at risk and didn't carry flood insurance. Similarly, with the torrential rains of the recent Hurricane Ida, communities in New York and New Jersey flooded that weren't near the coast or rivers. People died. I'm highlighting risks to residential properties, but the risks apply on a greater scale to commercial properties. Albert has a long and interesting history with Aspen and the Roaring Fork Valley, which he will describe. He was a nationally recognized environmental trial attorney and law professor. He taught environmental law at the University of Cincinnati College of Law and Florida International University Law School. Albert was the recipient in 2014 of the prestigious Marjorie Stone Douglas Defender of the Everglades Award. From 2004 to 2009, Albert was the director of the Nature Conservancy's Colorado River Project. In 2015, Albert founded Coastal Risk Consulting and moved to South Florida to grow it. Albert has been on a mission to demonstrate that it is critical for insurers, mortgage companies, developers, real estate investors, governments, and plain old property owners to understand the environmental risks for today and for tomorrow. The company's risk footprint technology can instantly analyze the risks of a property. The company also will help with resilience, guiding steps to protect property. The company now is being recognized as a leader in its field. Albert?
Thank you very much, Gerald. I appreciate that, and I couldn't have said it better myself. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be among Aspen friends and colleagues once again. Before we start the presentation, I just want to clarify one thing. For 20, 30 years, there's been many people who are working on decarbonization of our society. They're trying to lower carbon footprints, reduce CO2 emissions in buildings or automobiles or industry. And that's working to a lesser or greater extent, but that's not what I do. And that's not what my business involves. What you're going to hear today is the other side of a two-sided coin. So the first side of the coin is what is your company, or what are you doing to the planet with CO2 emissions? And that's not what I do. The other side of the coin is what's the planet doing to you and your business, and what can you do in the meantime to protect yourself? Because as we're going to talk about, a lot of these climate effects are really baked into the system, and they're going to be with us for a long time, at least in our lifetimes and our children's lifetimes, hopefully not our grandchildren's lifetimes, and we can get a handle on it. So while we're trying as a society and countries of the world are coming up to the Council of Parties now, I believe it's in Scotland coming up, and the work in the IPCC to try to bring CO2 emissions down. My company is trying to help individuals, businesses, and government buildings become safer in the meantime. So I don't want this whole thing to be too serious. So I kind of want to go back a little bit in time to my first visit to Aspen in the summer of 1966. I got this picture off the internet of Aspen around 1966. What did it look like? I couldn't afford a hotel room in Aspen. I was camping with some friends. So we went up to Lower Lost Man. We had an old Woody station wagon off my father's used car lot. And we had our Boy Scout camping equipment, and we went up to Lost Man. And my impressions of Aspen in 66 were, there were a lot of dogs wandering around off leash. The smell of weed was everywhere. I fell in love with the mountains, and I vowed to come back. And, you know, in some ways, the dogs wandering around off leash and the smell of weed everywhere hasn't really changed that much since 1966, I would say. So I had a lot of early visits to Aspen. My first time skiing was 68. I lived in one of the new condos in Snowmass that had just gone up for the summer of 1970. My first marriage, now in number 3, twice married in Aspen. We came to Aspen in 1972, and then more skiing, and had kids. And there's this little one you see here is now turning next week 35, and just gave us our first grandchild, a grandson in Indianapolis. And there he is again on Brush Creek Road. You all remember, or maybe some of you remember, when there was horses for hire there on Brush Creek Road. You can see Mount Daly in the background. And I lived in Snowmass for many years as well. And then when I first came to live full-time in Aspen in 2003, there's me at the top of West Maroon Pass with my Portuguese water dog. And for every year from 2003 to 2018, and George, I didn't do 2019 because of my playing tennis. I tore my Achilles. I hiked to Crested Butte every year. And that's again at the top of West Maroon Pass. But let's get down to some more serious stuff. So the backdrop of both the CO2 issues and global warming, and then what we're going to do about it, comes down to increasing temperatures. And this graph illustrates that global surface temperatures from 1951 to 1980, and then on to 2020, are increasing, with 2020 tying 2016 for the hottest, warmest years on record. But before this presentation, I was on another webinar that was called the Alliance for Climate Action. And one of the speakers was Senator Bill Nelson. He is a former senator from Florida. He's now the NASA administrator, and he's a former astronaut. And 2 things he said, literally, well, 3 things I'll tell you about. Number 1, he said, and I quote, "It's only going to get worse," quote. And then he said, "Unless we act now, instability here and around the world is only going to increase." And, you know, you have climate refugees, and we have a whole refugee problem, an immigration problem, and to a certain extent, it's political instability, but to a certain extent, you can say that the economies of some of the places where people are fleeing from just can't sustain them anymore. And finally, he announced, literally 30 minutes ago, a new NASA initiative called the Climate Resilience Design Center. And I was really intrigued about that, because what I'm going to be talking to you about really has to do with climate resilience design. So as a result of this climate change, the billion-dollar disaster events keep growing every year. Since 1980, we've had almost 300 climate disasters that have costs have exceeded $1 billion. So the total of almost $2 trillion. In 2020, there were $22 billion disasters. And now, every time I give one of these presentations, I keep having to change the figures. When I first was doing this back in July, there were, not including Western wildfires, there were 8 weather climate disaster events in 2021 exceeding $1 billion. Then as September 9th, as Gerald mentioned, you had Hurricane Ida coming in at between 27 and $40 billion of damage and uninsured losses. But then it became a tropical storm and moved up to the Northeast for another 16 to 24 billion in insured and uninsured losses. And then Hurricane Nicholas came right after that. So this level of damage to our society is not sustainable. We must make our society more resilient. So one of the products of climate change is too much water in the wrong place. And Gerald mentioned Houston. This is a picture on the left of downtown Houston in Hurricane Harvey. It was biblical. The amount of rainfall, the intensity, the length, the duration of Hurricane Harvey. As Gerald said, many of these places that were flooded weren't in FEMA flood zones. And then you have New York City with Tropical Storm Ida just weeks ago, where you had flash flooding in downtown Manhattan, not coastal flooding with Superstorm Sandy, not storm surge, not sea level rise, but so much rainfall in such a short period of time that it really caused flash flooding. And that's, we talk about game changers and we talk about wake-up calls. That was a real wake-up call. So some of you have heard of king tides. Gerald, like I am a property owner in South Florida, and we're now at king tide season. And king tide season is the season where astronomically the sun and the moon and the earth are in close alignment, and it pulls, the pull of the tides pulls the tides to their astronomical highest level. And you can see a for sale sign here, but this is what certain low-lying areas of Miami can look like during king tide season. And it's tough to sell if this was king tide season, but in the middle of the summer or in the spring, it doesn't look like this. And some unsuspecting buyer might end up buying this. So, Gerald has seen this. I vetted it with him before this, so it wouldn't be too distressing. But here's South Beach. This is sort of a bird's eye view of South Beach, and here's Gerald's apartment building down here. And the red blobs over here is the current king tide flooding in South Beach, according to NOAA. But then when we roll forward with sea level rise in 15 years, you can see, and again, this isn't my model. This isn't something I make up. This is NOAA's modeling. We happen to use this and modify it in our technology, but you can see that the aerial extent of it is spreading out. And then if you go out to 30 years, which is a residential mortgage, it's pretty bad in 2050. Now, this does not include raising the roads. What is Miami going to Beach raise the roads? This doesn't include pumps and other things that could address this. But without adaptation, without resilience, without investments, this is what it would look like. And it's not a pretty picture. And we haven't heard, I'm kind of giving you some like advanced news, but we think that there's going to be some NASA projections on the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica that it may collapse at some time in the not too distant future. And again, I'm talking to you, I'm the CEO of this company. We have scientists, we have software programmers. So if any of you had a direct, really difficult science question, I will take those questions and get them to my scientists and try to get an answer back from you. But here's the question. Let's go back here. This is the 2050 projection. But what if with the collapse of the Thwaites Glacier, this picture over here is accelerated to 2030? It's not going to give Miami and Miami Beach enough time to make the kinds of consequential infrastructure changes, nor is it going to give building owners really enough time. So we have to at least consider that things are going to get worse, and they could get really a lot worse. I put up this slide because in March of 2021, Miami, city of Miami, not Miami Beach, issued its 40-year stormwater plan. And this is a picture that they use in the plan. You've got, instead of streets, you have canals like Venice with boats on it. The bottom line here is, and not in the fine print, but toward the back of the report, it says that many of the stormwater infrastructure changes that Miami is talking about will not, their useful life will be less than the impacts of the sea level rise, so that they'll be overtaken by the water. And here's what they say, and I'm quoting. It says, a long-term option for the city would be to adapt and live with rising water over time, raise the lowest lying elevations in Miami, as well as portions of Miami-Dade County, Broward County, in a phased reconstruction of most structures and roadways below 10 feet above sea level. Now, most of Miami, and where the street where Gerald's apartment or condo is at 3.5 feet. If what they're saying is that because of sea level rise, Miami and most of South Florida along the coast is going to have to come up to 10 feet, that's a big damn deal. It really is. And whether it can be done is anybody's guess. And certainly there's going to be winners and losers. But you have Miami and you have Miami Beach, but you have Pompano Beach and you have this beach and that beach and smaller communities that are probably not going to have the wherewithal from bonding capacity and other things to do the kinds of things that maybe the larger cities are going to be able to do. All right, so I've been talking to you about the whole resilience issue and response and adaptation to too much water, but let's switch and let's talk a little bit about drought and too little water. So last September and October, during COVID, my wife, Julie, there she is at the bottom, we came out to a snowmass and rented a place. And it was just like Gerald was saying, in September has been just gorgeous every day, blue skies and no humidity and no rain. The last day that we left, which was the end of October last year, it had that big blizzard. But that was the day we had decided that we were going to drive to Mesa Verde, to Moab and Canyonlands, and then Mesa Verde. And when we finally made it through the blizzard, it took us like 8 hours to get to Moab, which is terrible, but it was like 18 degrees there. So it was pretty darn cold. But I took this picture of Mesa Verde, and some of you I know the story of the mega drought back in 1200, 1300. And scientists know this because of tree ring data. They can look back in time. And this was a thriving Native American trading center, population, agriculture. And then it was deserted until the 1880s when some cowboys stumbled upon it. Well, okay, we don't have to go to an ancient Anasazi site in Utah. We can just go to Lake Powell and we can see the 40-foot drop. We can see the bathtub ring. And when we read, we can see that the scientists are saying that this is the driest 22-year period in the Western United States in over 1,000 years. So again, same question. And I've told you what Senator Bill Nelson said a half an hour ago, but what if the worst is yet to come? What if the worst is yet to come for Gerald in his condo in South Beach, or what's if the worst is yet to come for Aspen? And I just picked up a couple of news reports for Aspen water supplies in 2020 and 2021 in the Aspen Times and on the Aspen website. The drought that kept its grip on Pitkin County and most of Colorado all summer is now reaching into early winter. November was the 8th month this year that precipitation at the Aspen water treatment plant was below average. And 2021, with the U.S. Drought Monitor declaring Pitkin County in extreme and severe drought conditions with local streams running at 40 to 70% of median flows, the city of Aspen is under a stage 2 water shortage. And this is important. As our water supply is solely from local streams, we must all work together to conserve our precious resource. The city of Aspen has a total, I believe, of 10 acre-feet of stored water in a small reservoir. It's nothing. If the stream levels in the Roaring Fork continue to drop with, a mega drought, then then there's a serious issue, and the resiliency is in a serious issue. And Gerald sent this to me yesterday or the day before. This is in the Wall Street Journal. Colorado River is in crisis. The Walton family is pushing a solution. I don't know, Gerald, did you want to say a few words about this?
Well, just simply that the Walton family has taken a public service position and funded to the extent of $200 million efforts to address the shortage of water to downstream users. Many of you probably have heard that there is a Colorado River Compact call for the first time ever, which requires many of the downstream users to cut back a little bit. What the Walton family is trying to do, and it's become somewhat commercial because there are opposing viewpoints, particularly in agricultural interests, is they're trying to monetize water and allow a market to develop, which would enable cities with money like Aspen to purchase water, and the idea would be they would purchase it from the users that have the least value in their use, which would typically be agricultural growers of things like alfalfa, which are thirsty crops, which are not particularly valuable. So that's what they're trying to do, and it's controversial, and we'll have to see what happens.
Right. And of course, you got, probably most of you have heard lectures on this in Aspen before. This is what I worked on a little bit when I was helping the Nature Conservancy with their Colorado River project. But an awful lot of our water in the Roaring Fork is committed to go under the pass in the tunnel and goes down into the Arkansas. And some of that has been purchased from the farmers by Colorado Springs and Pueblo, and some of it still goes to farmers in the Arkansas Valley. But theoretically, under a new system or on a revised system, it's theoretically possible that water rights could be purchased back to give Aspen more flowing water and less going through the tunnel. I saw this yesterday. This has to be a classic Pete McBride picture of his trip down the Yampa River. I think he started up near Dinosaur National Park, exploring an epic Colorado River during record-breaking drought. He and his colleague had to hike through the, ankle-deep water with 60-pound packs and their fold-up kayaks. So it's not a good situation. This is from National Geographic just yesterday. Not a good situation out west. So we have this risk footprint technology, and we provide that we invented. And we provide hazard risk assessments for any property, any building in the United States in seconds. But when I was preparing for this, I was working with Gerald, and I wanted to just, for my own purposes, to create a little bit of a spreadsheet in the Roaring Fork Valley from Glenwood Springs up to the Wildwood School, and including Wildcat Ranch and Buttermilk and Gerald's house up in Snowmass up on Juniper Hill Road. And what I thought that a lot of people would say, well, Roaring Fork Valley, it's all the same. All the risks are the same within the valley. But in fact, what I found, because I hadn't really done this before, no one had asked me to, I decided to have a couple of different locations in Glenwood Springs, Wildcat Ranch, Basalt, Wildwood School, Buttermilk, where I used to live up in Highlands, and Gerald in Snowmass. And what I found was, yeah, there are differences. So there's differences in pluvial or heavy rainfall risk. Some are high, some are low. Riverine, obviously Wildwood School is high because it's right next to the Roaring Fork, but Gerald is low, high up on Juniper Hill Road. In Highlands, Glen Eagle's low. On wildfire, I found really only one high zone near in Glenwood Springs, which happened this blob right here. Here's Glenwood Springs. This blob here is high, and that happened to be right where the South Canyon fire was in 1994. Then when you go back to extreme heat, future extreme heat, all pretty much the same, but drought is different. Areas down in Glenwood Springs have a low risk of future drought. Others are medium. Future extreme rainfall risks are high in certain areas and medium in other areas. So again, we go back to the tragic South Canyon fire, but even in a medium wildfire risk area, well, with those kids shooting, tracer bullets up on the firing range, we have the Lake Christine fire in 2018 that did a lot of damage, very scary. I was coming back from London on July 4th at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and we drove right through it. Right through Basalt and El Jebel, and saw it like firsthand just as it was starting. And the Grizzly Creek wildfire in 2020, 32,000 acres, and mudslides that we all know this summer, the mudslides that actually changed the path of the Colorado River. So that gets back to the question, what if it's going to get worse? What can we do, and why should we do it? And here you can see a picture of Vice President Al Gore. There's me on the stage in Miami. And the question is, I retired from practicing law. I retired from law school. Why did I launch a startup for software as a service hazard assessment at age 65? And I go back to 1966, coming out to Aspen, falling in love with nature and the mountains. Why did I become an environmental lawyer? And what I realized was, okay, we all have an obligation to do our best to try to save the planet and reduce carbon emissions. But in the meantime, people are dying. People died just recently in Tropical Storm Ida, just in New York City, in those basement apartments, and properties are losing value and being damaged. And as you remember, with Superstorm Sandy, many buildings in Water Street and Lower Manhattan were knocked out for a year or two, and that's where people worked or people lived, and that is a great burden and a hardship. So I kind of thought in this next act, because I had been retired for about 2 weeks when some scientists asked me to help them put this startup together, is that there was a place for resilience, and there was a place for trying to make these buildings safer. And that's kind of why I did it. So we invented this online system. We have 15 scores and more to come at the property and community level. And we map all kinds of different floods, from heavy rainfall to tsunamis to rivers and streams and storm surge. And, I've already showed you the tide flooding, winds, tornado, community resilience, wildfire, earthquake, and also future climate risks. And this is important. A lot of people go like, well, okay, it's going to get hotter or rainier or droughtier in the future, but so what? What can I do about it? So part of our process is not just to give people bad news, but to try to explain to them what they can do with their building. It may be more efficient chillers or bigger roof drains or recycling gray water so they can use it for landscaping and other things like that. And this is the last slide. What I have learned is that data and modeling alone is not going to close America or the world's resilience deficit. We need a process that both gives people actionable data and intelligence, but we also sometimes have to put our arm around their shoulders and help them walk through the path toward making buildings safer and more resilient. And so the company that I developed has both. It's not a pure tech company, it's what's called a hybrid company. And so we have the technology, and in steps 4, 5, and 6 here, it's the put our arm around their shoulder to help them. And this is this image on the right, and then I'm going to open it to questions. But the image on the right is a client building, a high-rise building with an underground parking garage in Houston during Hurricane Harvey. And you can see this barrier. It's what's called a self-closing flood barrier, and it's water from Hurricane Harvey, flood water on the right, and a little bit of wetness on the left. And the barrier was one of the few buildings that had it, and most buildings still don't have it. And most buildings in Miami Beach with underground parking garage still don't have it. It protected the foundation from the hydrostatic pressures of the floodwaters, and it protected cars from floating in the floodwaters. So this is the path that we're trying to move commercial real estate, multifamily real estate toward. And I heard someone describe it, what's needed. And you probably remember from, after, the Dust Bowl, the US Department of Agriculture had the Agricultural Extension Service. And they sent people out to the farmers to try to help them understand how to plow their fields in a way where the soil wouldn't blow away. That's what we need now. We need a resilience extension service to go out, because industrial, commercial, and multifamily buildings are a very, very large percentage of the in-place assets in the United States. Whatever homeowners do or don't do, it's, that's just a real question mark. But we have to get the main buildings to improve their resilience while we still can, and before it's too late. So that's it. That's my last slide. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, so I'll ask the first couple of questions. And that was a very terrific, informative talk. How does risk footprint work? What is it that you encompass to give you the kind of information that you can pass on in an instant?
Right. So we're in the Amazon cloud, and we're reliant upon very fast servers that can take databases into the servers, and also have what's called an API with other databases, which is a link to other databases that works in an instant. So we use 3 types of databases, basically. We use databases that are proprietary, that we pay royalties to others. open source databases that are mostly from the federal government, and then 3 databases and models and algorithms that we have developed with our own science team. And we can mesh them together, and basically you put an address in, you push a button, and all these things happen. You get the spreadsheet, you get the report, and it's a screening level report, and it starts like a springboard, starts the process. It's not the end of the process, and nor is it supposed to be a final design. We work all the time with architects and engineers and landscape architects, because we're just pointing them in the right direction and showing them where the red flags are.
Gerald, this is Richard. Can I ask a question? Because I'm going to lose you in a minute.
Please.
Albert, thank you very much. I'm going to ask a question that you may not be prepared to answer, so feel free to acknowledge that. But if you're familiar with the Pandora project in Aspen, and do you have any opinions about what the environmental impact of that may be in terms of the kinds of issues that you might deal with or have familiarity with?
Is that the new ski area, you mean?
Yes.
No, I just, all I know is sort of, a couple of years old, what I read in the paper. I don't, it's, no,
right.
I can't, Richard, sorry.
Right. No, I understand. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll pick it up again. So obviously, an individual property owner or developer, and then residential property or a commercial property can get a risk footprint report and see the dangers to the property now or in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. Broadening the perspective, how you appeal particularly to companies that have portfolios of properties that company might have 20, 50, 100 properties across the country, and some of those might have environmental risk. How do you appeal to companies like that as a business?
Sure, Gerald. So REITs are our main client, REITs commercial real estate with portfolios, because what we do is we get an Excel spreadsheet of their addresses, we pop it into the system, we run it through and score out all the properties for the 15 columns of risk. And then we give them back their Excel spreadsheet. And with that, using Excel, because they're, well aware of how to use it, they can determine which properties of, let's just say 50 or 100 or 500 score high on the red flag risks. And let's say it's 10%. So let's say they had 300 properties and there's 30 that are bad actors or have high risks. And then on a consulting basis, we sit down with them and we look more closely at the 30 bad actors. Some of them, they may decide to sell those properties and get out of them. Others, they may want to increase the insurance on the property. And then some others, they want to make them safer. And that's where we come back into the picture and we bring in experts for them to talk to, not as general contractors, not as architects or engineers, but as an owner's rep, sort of behind the scenes to guide them on how, whether it makes sense. The first thing that a large company, there's no company that's going to greenlight a large retrofit unless it has an ROI or a positive cost benefit. So those are calculations that we make using our modeling, again, desktop. And then once the C-suite or whoever it is decides that they do want to go forward with risk mitigation, then if they want, we can bring the experts in who will help them do it the right way and pick the right experts and manage those experts, whether it's a flood barrier, stormwater, different roof drains, protecting communications equipment, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, whatever it is that's going to make the building safer, and that it will withstand these hazards in better than it did before.
So one thing that occurs to me is that a lot of these companies are public, and others have private investors, and the public and the private investors may not fully understand what the risks are to those properties. How might you fit into that?
No, that's a really good point. So starting in Europe, there have been initiatives that are really gaining traction in the investor community. Some people call it ESG, environmental social governance, but the ESG or green investment funds globally, maybe 40 to 60 trillion dollars. There's a lot of money invested in green funds, and people are investing more and more in these green funds, and they're competing against each other for people's money. My fund's greener than your fund. No, my fund's greener. And in order for them to do this, they need information on these public companies as to, are they really green, or is it just greenwash? So disclosures and the requirements for disclosures are coming out now. It's becoming a real thing. And now here in the United States, the SEC, Gensler, has talked about climate disclosures for public companies in the United States. So once that happens, Gerald, there's a domino effect, because when you stand up these dominoes, and the first domino is disclosing the impacts. Remember, I talked about what your company's doing to the planet. That's been around for a long time. Now the disclosure is what the planet's doing to your company. So once you start disclosing that, then the questions that the investment community is going to ask is, how many assets are at risk? Is it material? Materiality is the key word with the SEC. Is it material? And if it is material, what are you doing about it? And if the answer is, I don't know, and I'm not doing anything about it, and I'm not making my assets more resilient, then the investment community may take a hike and say, I don't want to be invested in your REIT, or I don't want to be invested in your company anymore, because you had to disclose your risks, but you're not doing anything about it. So I feel like we're in that domino chain to help pick them up and put them right before they start all toppling over, because the disclosures are going to lead to more pressure to fix assets. I think that's just inevitable.
I don't see any hands raised. Any questions? Greg?
Well, Greg had one, and there was also one in the chat from Stephen saying, do we need flood insurance in Aspen? And I would say the answer to that is location specific. The risk, don't just go off a FEMA flood map. As Gerald was saying, he had a friend, and we all maybe know people who were flooded in Harvey down in Houston who weren't in FEMA flood zones. I'm not trying to sell anything here, but you can get a risk footprint report at riskfootprint.com for $99, and you just go in there and put a credit card in your address, and you'll get it within a day. And that's going to tell you information about your flood risk. I'll give you an example of my own home here in Boca Raton. The footprint of the home is not in a FEMA flood zone. So the bank, the insurance agent said, oh, Albert, you don't need flood insurance. But my report showed that in the golf course behind and in the cul-de-sac in the front of the house, there's a lot of heavy rainfall risk. So because I'm not in a FEMA flood zone, I get for $350 a year NFIP, federal flood insurance, for $350 a year, because I'm not in a flood zone. So why would anybody that has heavy rainfall flood risk, because they don't know it, most people don't know it, because heavy rainfall risks are not in FEMA flood maps, why would anyone not pay $350 and get covered with a good policy? It just doesn't make any sense. But I will tell you one more fact and then open it up. For the last 10 years, NFIP, which is the Federal National Flood Insurance Program, has had about 5 million homeowners that have flood insurance. And it's actually declined a little bit. It's pretty much held steady for a decade, no matter how much all these floods are increasing and everything else. Studies by our scientists and others, because of the heavy rainfall risks and climate change, believe that 40 to 60 million homes need flood insurance. 5 million have it, 40 to 60 million need it. That's a huge gap right there. And to make our society more resilient, something's got to change, because I mean, we don't have universal health care, and yet everybody needs health insurance. And if 40 to 60 million homes need flood insurance and only 5 million have it, it's a big deficit, resilience deficit.
Alan?
Okay, Albert, thank you. I live in Miami as well, right across the bay from Gerald. And I'm curious, since you used his building as a case study, what did you come up with? What actions should Gerald or the condo association take at this point in time?
Well, Gerald's
Sal,
HOA
please.
refused to buy a report. They didn't want to pay the money, and $200. I don't think they wanted to know what it was going to say, because then the HOA board would be confronted with a possible need to have an assessment. And probably everybody on this call knows about the Surfside building collapse. And I with a professor, or Dr. Parkinson from FIU, Florida National University, he and I wrote a white paper on the climate change aspects of the Surfside collapse. It's on our website, you can get it. And here's the thing, we're not saying that climate change or sea level rise or salt water caused the collapse. We don't know that yet, because the forensic experts are still working on it. Could have been a defect design. But I can tell you that the $15 million of deferred maintenance that has been identified was caused by salt air, salt water, groundwater, and climate change. And they could have fixed that and the building would have collapsed anyway. I can't say that. I'm not saying that. But I do know that the property manager who managed that building, who was on television, said that salty groundwater was coming in the underground parking garage every day, 24/7, 365. I had 2 pumps running. I tried to get more pumps to keep the salt water out. I couldn't keep it out. And we know that the columns down in the underground parking garage were corroded. The rebar was corroded. There was spalling on the concrete. Did that cause the collapse? I'm not saying it did, but it needed to be fixed. And it was caused by sea level rise over 40 years, pushing salty groundwater closer to the surface. Because a lot of people don't understand that sea level rise is not just above the ground, but the sea is actually under the ground and is pushing the groundwater, the Biscayne aquifer, Alan, higher and higher, and making it saltier and saltier. So what I don't know what we would say to Gerald's building. It would be very building specific, but they didn't even want to buy a report, and that's true of a lot of these HOAs and a lot of the condos. They have these fights between the HOA members just to get the past issues assessed, and to then say to them, well, you really need to assess yourselves to deal with sea level rise and storm surge. They're going like, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. They don't want to hear that.
Well, just to respond in regard to my building, they had a very involved maintenance and rehab program only 5 years ago to make, so I don't think we have any structural issues. But obviously more needs to be done.
Albert,
Steve?
could you repeat that web address?
Yes, it's www.riskfootprint.com.
Because I got an unsolicited call from my insurance broker, one of the concierge brokers,
Right.
and they raised the question of flood insurance, and I thought it was nuts. And they gave me a proposal. It was in the hundreds of dollars, and it scaled up a little bit. But if we were in a flood zone, it would be much more expensive. Is that the case?
A FEMA flood zone. And then what I'm trying to tell you, Steve, is, I mean, a lot of people say this, and I believe it, where it rains, it can flood. If you live in a place where it can rain, it can flood. I'm doing work now for REITs in San Antonio and Glendale, Arizona. Those are flash flood capitals of the world. And people go, it's so dry. I'm in a FEMA X zone. Why on earth do I? If you could see the videos on social media of what happens there in the Southwest when they have these gully washers, it's scary. Cars get, homes, cars get washed away, and you don't 100% know that they're going to stay in the wash. That's the problem. So I would just say that if take seriously, and I would commend your agent. I don't sell insurance, I don't sell real estate, I don't sell anything except the science. But if they think that you should consider a few $100 flood policy, there's not any harm to it.
Thank you.
Greg,
That's a good confirmation. This has just happened a week ago, so I just pretty much dismissed it, but I didn't forget it.
Right.
So thank you.
Albert, a couple of things. One, I would love to have a copy of your very first photo of the Sinclair gas station, because the summer of 1966, I pumped gas there.
Okay.
And it's a fond memory, actually. The second thing is, and this is my sense of humor, Gerald, when the water gets to the second level, you're going to have really fresh stone crabs at Joe's. But my bigger question is, there is Americans, and maybe all societies, but Americans have a great capacity for denying reality if it's inconvenient to them, whether that's wearing a mask or getting a vaccine, or if you feel a lump in your breast, going to have it checked, because if you don't have it checked, you can't have breast cancer. It's just a lump. So it seems like we have a lump in our breast in America, and you are pointing out a lot of data that it should be extremely alarming, and yet our approach to this as a nation is sort of ignore or deny or pass it on. Do you get exasperated, or am I characterizing things in an inappropriate way?
No, Greg, it's 5 years I've been doing this, and at the beginning, my friends and colleagues said there's no market here. You're whistling Dixie. It's just, and I kept going because I did believe that climate change is real, and if we could do something about it, it wasn't going to be in my lifetime where it's going to start cooling down, and that we could do something in the meantime to make places safer. And now I think we're right on the cusp of this type of resilience practice. And as I said, I was just so thrilled today to hear Bill Nelson, announce for the first time, it probably will be in the paper tomorrow, NASA's Climate Resilient Design Center. He's calling it like the command center, like NASA, command center, but for resilience. So we'll see if it's real. We'll see if what it does. I don't know, but I feel like the time is now, and that this is going to become a real thing. So hopefully it will be.
Is I don't remember exactly the number you said, something like 60 million people live in areas where they should have some kind of insurance. Isn't the deeper message that maybe they shouldn't live in those areas at all? Or now we're getting into social engineering.
Right.
But
Yeah.
this is, I mean, just because I have insurance doesn't mean that I won't be devastated by the problem, and so on.
Well, I try to take a non-advocacy, it's America, it's a free country, people are gonna live wherever they want to live. And I'd never, get into that level of conversation of should or whatever, because people and the investor, whether it's a single family home or it's a high net worth and, a person, or whether it's a large corporation, each one of them has different size pockets and they can decide. I had a client who bought a report and for a home on the barrier island of Palm Beach near the intercoastal, near the bike trail. And he called me and, I do consultations. And he said, I believe in sea level rise. I believe in climate change. I'm buying this house basically to tear down for $4 million. I'm going to build an $8 million home as high as the law will allow me to do that. Eight feet above my first floor will be 8 feet above sea level. If I can even go higher with a variance, I will. And I said, that's good. What about the street? So he said, the people on my street are some of the CEOs of America's largest corporations, and our homes have a great, tax rateable for the city of Palm Beach. I don't believe they're going to let that happen. They're going to raise the streets and they're going to put pumps in. And I ride my bike. I'm a biker. I go down the bike path, and I think they're going to raise the bike path. And that's what I'm betting on. And I'm going to, spend my money that way. Far be it from me. He ended up was the president of a large commercial lender to REITs, and he became a very good client. And I've done a lot of work for him. And but far be it from me to tell someone with that kind of wealth that they shouldn't do whatever they want to do, and to make their own decisions based on their own risk tolerance. So that's how I approach this, which is you give them the facts, you try to help them understand what's coming at them, and then if they want help, our help in doing something like building it higher, putting a flood barrier, putting better stormwater or whatever it is, then we'll help them do that. And if not, that's fine too.
Okay.
George, your hand is up.
Yeah, I came from California and I lived in Malibu, and one of my houses burned to the ground, and another one that I was renting while I was building in Aspen slid down the hillside. So I'm sort of aware of this kind of thing, and I have some friends of mine that are buying properties or considering properties in Florida because of the low income tax, no state income tax. So Al, what would you advise? I mean, you get a report. I mean, it really concerned me on not only saltwater damage, which I saw in Malibu. It's incredible what it can do to your furniture, lamps, everything, but hurricane and flood. And so do you do a report on covering both those instances? And
Yeah,
the insurance
cover-
could be very...
Right, we cover every type of flooding and we quantify it so you know how high the water would be next to the building. And but you have to understand, George, that it's funny, I lived at 8,000 feet in snowmass. So we're used to in Colorado big numbers. But if you live at 8 feet above sea level in South Florida on the East Coast, you're pretty well protected. If you live in Tampa, you're not protected till you're at 14, 15, or 20 feet, because the surge risk on the West Coast is much higher because of the Gulf, the bathymetry of the Gulf of Mexico versus the Atlantic Ocean generates higher surges. But inches make a difference. And I can tell you that it's very, even in Palm Beach, and I do a lot of work in Palm Beach, there are low areas in Palm Beach that are risky. And I would, tell people to use a lot of caution about buying or staying there. And then there's other areas, even on the beach block. I had a very good friend whose parents passed away, and he was in charge of selling the home on the beach block in Palm Beach, a little north of the center of town. And he's, a believer. And he said, look, let's do a report. And the first floor was 13 feet above sea level. And the street was high. So he could walk down to the beach. And he said, well, I'm going to show this to the buyer. He listed it for 5.7 million and sold it for 5.5 million and gave the report to the buyer. Other places in Palm Beach are not good and are already having problems with king tides. So you can't make broad brush statements. If you have a particular home or group of homes in a particular area in South Florida that you want to look at, that's what we do. We're happy to help you. We often, there's one guy whose main criteria, he was coming from California to Bal Harbor. He wanted Bal Harbor because he was Orthodox Jew, and he wanted to walk to shul on Saturday. So one of his main criteria was, am I going to be able to walk to shul? And, he was in his 50s. So I had to talk to him a little bit about sea level rise, because, he's not in his 70s or 80s. He's going to be around. If he's walking to shul, he's going to be around on king tides. And that particular shul is close to the intercoastal. So now we're looking at what other locations where he's near the beach but can walk to a shul. Different people have different criteria. You don't know what, but that's that's what's really fun about this job, is that I get to talk to a lot of different people. I get to hear a lot of stories, and I hope that at the end of the day, I'm helping them make better decisions. And that's what's floating my boat these days, other than getting back up and hiking and going down, take some turns, which I dearly miss. I gotta keep that in the picture as well.
Al, I live right next to the Chabad, so I can walk no matter what.
Okay, good for you.
I know you can ride in your little go-kart with a flag. So Albert's business is at an inflection point. He's got the attention of REITs with big portfolios. He's got the attention of mortgagees who will be writing mortgage policies, lenders of all kinds, and title insurance, insurance companies, etc. He's growing. His business is attractive to a whole lot of companies. Moody's bought a company that does something like what he does, just so they can quantify risk of companies in bonds and the like. He's looking for growth capital. If anybody is interested, contact me or contact Albert and get you information. I think that covers most of the things we wanted to cover. Aaron, do you have anything to say in summing up?
This was one of the most interesting sessions. You're starting a whole new industry. You're affecting many, many industries. And I would love to have a report for Sarasota, Florida, because in the last 10 years, the water apartments have multiplied probably about 10 times. And the homes, my former home was in the flood zone. In our boathouse, everything. I wonder whether it will survive, but I'd like to notify all my former friends there
Right.
that there are problems that they don't realize they exist.
I just
However-
Aaron, I just did Bird Island yesterday. You know Bird Island in Sarasota, where all those,
It's not Bird Island, it's another
Bird
name.
Key. Bird
Huh?
Key.
Bird
Key.
Key.
Bird
Bird
Key, is that
Key.
what it's called? Bird Key?
I
Yeah,
always
just-
thought that would be flooded.
It's 12 feet. It has a lot of surge. I just did it yesterday, honestly, just coincidentally. And I was surprised that Bird Island, or Bird Key, excuse me, actually the streets are 12 feet above sea level. So from an existential sea level rise standpoint, it's pretty good. But from a storm surge standpoint, it's not so good. But I'd be happy to do anything for you. Just let Gerald will give you my
Yes,
email
please.
and just send me the address. I'll do it for you.
Al, could you explain how you integrate your homeowner's insurance with your flood insurance? Assuming it's with the
Yeah.
same company.
That's a very good point. Typically, homeowners insurance does not include flood insurance. There's a few private insurers that are combining them, but by and large, 99% of the time, people think they're covered by flood, but they're not. Homeowners insurance is going to cover your wind and your fire and casualty and theft and things like that, but not flood. And so most people that have flood insurance, and as I said, it's not enough, get the federal flood insurance from the NFIP, which has a cap for homeowners of $250,000 for the structure and $100,000 for the contents. But for a big home, and when I lived in a big home in Aspen, you have excess insurance, wildfire or whatever. And for the home when I lived in Key Biscayne, we had excess flood, excess wind, fine arts, valuable articles, blah, 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 blah. It gets very, very expensive. But it's very important that even a foot of water in your living room from the Roaring Fork River or from water coming down off a mountain is not going to be covered with a homeowner's policy. It's going to be covered by a flood policy, and most people don't have it. And now they get that damage, and yeah, maybe it's not, going to be the end of the world, but it's still a lot of money, and it's just such a pain. Whereas it's better to get the insurance, to get the flood insurance, and have that in your pocket. And if you're not in a FEMA flood zone, it's very inexpensive. I think, as Steve said. And the other thing is that you can get layers. You can get a layer of FEMA NFIP insurance, which tops out at $250,000, but then you could get excess on top of that, that would, by a private flood insurer, that could be replacement value. So that may be more expensive, but it would be important to have that peace of mind. The other thing I just want to say for George, and there's a lot of landslide and land movement in the Roaring Fork Valley, and there's more after the fires. We are working, it's not in our system yet, but we're working with a vendor that uses satellites to detect millimeter level land movement on properties all over the United States. It's not there yet, it's a new technology, but we're hoping to have a screening level for now. If you had a property that you want done, it can be done using the satellite data, but it's expensive. What we're trying to do with all of our, like for a commercial property, our reports are $200 and $99 for a single family home. It's not expensive and it happens in seconds. What we're trying to do with the land movement, and you talked about your home sliding down the hill, is to have a screening tool that is within our system fast, that at least red flags. These satellites go around the earth every 11 days and they take the measurements of land movement and compare it every 11 days. And so once this partner of ours builds this out for the entire United States, which is going to take millions of dollars for them to do that, but you know, that's neither here nor there for the moment. We're going to create a screening tool for land movement that will be very valuable in places like the Roaring Fork Valley, because you don't want to buy a home that's already moving. And right now you don't know that. There's nothing unless you have an absolute geotechnical study. You're really not going to know that the home you're buying is on land that's moving.
For the
Several
interstate, you're
several
coming-
years ago, we had people, two different companies that were being formed doing exactly what you stated for earthquakes and movements. And I don't think I have the name and the numbers, but I know the person that invited, and I'm going to reinvestigate. My former home was in the flood zone in Aspen, so we had to have insurance.
Right.
Speaking of insurance, Albert, could you speak to the future of the National Flood Insurance Program? I know it's, to some extent, it's commercial, controversial.
Right.
Some people want to make more at-risk, properties pay for itself. I mean, there are instances of homes that have been flooded time after time after time and still can get insurance. And to an extent, I begin to wonder if the cost of this to the federal government becomes way too high, and the program gets cut back substantially. What's your thought?
Well, it's a really good question, Gerald. So FEMA literally October 1st, and we're now at October 6th, came out with it's called Risk Rating 2.0, where they're beginning to make the premiums more actuarially sound. But it's a slow walk. It's going to take years, if not decades, because they can only raise the premium percentages so much per year. So it's a slow walk. Congress has bailed out the NFIP at 25 billion, 30 billion after Katrina. And they're probably going to have to do that again, and bail them out and bail them out. The biggest problem that I see, which I mentioned, is that the FEMA flood maps don't include heavy rainfall flooding. And they certainly don't include climate change and sea level rise. And, it astounds me, but if somebody's home flooded due to a king tide, Gerald, and they had flood insurance, they'd be able to get covered. To me, it's not an insurable event because it's not sudden and accidental and an act of nature. It's an act of nature, but it's planetary. It's not a storm that comes up. So there's a lot of fundamental issues with NFIP that need to be dealt with, but this is a baby step in the right direction. At least that's my 2 cents on the matter. I don't consider myself the world's expert on the FEMA system, but that's what I know.
Al, is your email on the webpage?
Yes, it is. Well, let me give it to you if that helps you. It's my name, Albert Slap, all together, no dots or dashes, at riskfootprint.com.
Thank you.
I mean, in regard to insurance, my personal experience with handling the insurance for a building on the beach in Los Angeles is we can buy $3.5 million worth of flood insurance from the federal government for a relatively nominal amount. But if the building is worth far more, and if you wanted excess coverage from that, it becomes totally unaffordable.
Given my sense of humor, a closing thought here, we're then smiling in hopes that it's actually funny. The Muhammad Ali was approached by a journalist who said, your opponent has studied you very carefully and they've got a plan. They've got a plan, they got this figured out, they know how to beat Muhammad Ali. And no, excuse me, it's not Muhammad Ali, it was Mike Tyson, thank you. And so Mike Tyson's response was, yeah, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the face. And so the version of that is a lot of people have a plan, but they may get slapped in the face. And so I wish you success.
Thank you.
It seems to me that success is inevitable.
Well, thank you. And thanks everybody for your time and attention. I appreciate it. And, hope to see you in person one of these days. I'm back in Aspen, working my way back.
You're going to be a busy guy.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a very enlightening discussion this afternoon. I just have a few quick housekeeping items for everyone. Thank you to everyone who responded to our survey that we sent out. If you had a suggestion for a topic, if you could please email me so I could get a little bit more information on your subject, I would appreciate it. The surveys were anonymous, so I don't know who sent what. And we are slowly putting our previous videos up on our website, aspenmastermind.com. So feel free to go check that out. And next week, we will have Isabel Friedheim, founder of Athena Technology Acquisition Corporation, joining us. And we hope that you will all be here as well. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.